Welcome to the Surfcast Podcast, your weekly source for surf fishing discussions, tactics, interviews, news, and more. The Surfcast Podcast is hosted by Jerry Audet and Toby Lapinski, two of the most dedicated and obsessed surf fishermen that you will ever meet. The tide is up, the wind is at our back, so let's hit the surf.
Man, gosh, it's so warm this weekend. I don't know. Jenks was at the Saltwater Edge was asking me, when do I think I'm going to catch my first striper in the surf? And I was like, well, even though it's February, it might be now. Because it's been so warm. It's crazy. But, I won't end up doing that. But I might check out the trout. I might go out fishing for trout. It seems like there was a lot of bugs flying around in the yard the other day. Just, it feels trouty out there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I was rebuilding a rod, stripped it down to the bare blank, was putting the lacquer finish on it the other day, standing outside doing it, and a bug landed on the finish. And I was just like, dude, you are so lost. There's birds that aren't flying, that shouldn't be around right now, but I think they're a little better off than some random-ass bug that's flying around, and he was off base. But it's kind of funny because, I've been thinking trout. I started sitting down on the tying bench recently. I haven't tied a fly for trout since last June when I was getting out. So, because I usually tie a bunch in the spring and then I fish in the spring and then don't really, I fish off what I have. But I started tying some stuff and oh my God, I'm breaking thread. I'm bending hooks. It's like a freaking Neanderthal trying to tie on these 14, 16, 18 hooks that are like pinky nail size. I got to get back on tying some saltwater flies, which is a little bit easier for my monkey hands to work on. And this is a good segue into this week's installment of the Surfcast Podcast. But before we get into that, I just want to remind you to subscribe, whether you're listening to us on YouTube, you're watching us on YouTube, you're listening on podcast channels. Subscribe, follow along with us on social media, on Instagram, on Facebook, because that's where we'll be making any announcements when new episodes are coming out, when we're having discussions on topics, and we get down the road and we start doing merch and releasing that's probably where we're going to put it out first. So be sure to follow along with us.
Yeah, good transition right there, Toby. That was good. right into the topic today, which is going to be surf fly fishing with a wetsuit. Using a wetsuit with the fly rod. I think that fly fishermen are really resistant to using a wetsuit. It isn't just that they don't think they need it. It's really that they are just unwilling to use it. That it's not even it goes even further, I think, than, I don't really like it or I don't know it. It's I don't want to or I don't think I should use a wetsuit. Mm-hmm. And I don't really know why that is. And I have my own theories, but do you think that's true too, Toby, as well? And why do you think that is?
No, definitely. And I've only been, when I was younger, I fly fished the salt a bit, but I didn't know what the heck I was doing. So I only really consider my experience pretty recent, actually doing it about a year now, but I researched it quite a bit beforehand, and I saw on really both salt and fresh, I've been doing the fresh longer, fly rod wise, but there's just at times almost blind following of tradition and traditional methods and materials and tactics and techniques, and the wetsuit falls right into there. You don't, because it always hasn't been, because it's always been, if you're surf fly fishing, you had the waders, that's what you have to do. And guys don't even think about it. But for me, it wasn't even a question. Coming into fly fishing, the surf was gonna just be a straight continuation of what I'm doing with the spinning gear where it was applicable. There's just no question for me. But I think it's that blind following a tradition.
I think it's probably quite a bit of that as well. I think that's probably a big factor. And when I say fly fisherman, I want to make it very clear. I consider myself a fly fisherman too. It makes up 50% of my effort in many seasons. The last few seasons, it's been a little bit less than that for sure. But I catch hundreds of stripers on the fly every year. So when I say fly fisherman, I include myself in there. I just, I'm sort of, I guess, and you too now are fringy. We're way out on the edge. doing this, but that's because the tradition thing. But I also think that a lot of fly anglers want to trout fish in the surf, that they want to catch bigger saltwater trout. And so they're trying to recreate their experiences on the river or in the stream in the surf. And there's certainly nothing wrong with that. It can be really fun, and there's lots of techniques that you can learn from trout fishing. And honestly, one of the top ways I've learned a lot of my techniques with plugs, specifically soft plastics, is adopting some of these theories from trout fishing, muskie fishing with the fly rod. I've learned a ton that I've applied in the surf from those two modalities. But one of the things that limits people in the surf with the fly rod, amongst many other things, is casting distance. It's talked about constantly, and everyone's trying to find the perfect rod and the perfect line and how long their leader should be and the materials in their fly that don't collect water, all this stuff. You know what would make more difference than any of that? Is putting on a wetsuit. Because the wetsuit gives you distance. It's just a tool. It's not about swimming. It's not about, being hardcore. It's not about anything. It's about giving you distance. You can get out further. And I don't know about you, Toby, and I'm going to give you my opinion and then I'll ask you the question. When it comes to the plugging rod, the amount of distance that makes a difference for me when I'm plugging, it has to be at least 25 to maybe even closer to 30 yards. Anything else in there, it's sort of, I'll figure out, how to cast whatever it is that I'm casting to get into the zone. So I have to make like a really big difference in how far I get out of the water or something like that to make a difference. So with the wetsuit, it helps me with this plugging rod, but it's not as critical. With the fly rod, 3 feet can make a difference, and certainly 10 feet. And I'm telling everybody right now who's listening to this, who's maybe interested in fly fishing or already fly fishes, with a wetsuit, you can get 20, 30, 40, 50 feet or yards so easily. So what do you think about that, Toby? Like, what in terms of like the distance really makes a difference for you? How do you think about that?
No, it helps me personally a ton because, like, to start off, if I'm on a trout stream, I'm not a beautiful fly caster, but I can get the job done. I got my distance down. I can pretty much trout side bomb a fly wherever I need to. In the salt, not so much. My distance is very limited casting in the salt, partly because I don't have great technique. I have enough to get by. Partly because, like, the ginormous stupid flies that I'm throwing that are basically a feather and hair version of an adult bunker. So, like, I'm already limited in a lot of ways with how far I'm going to be able to get that fly out. So by adding the wetsuit in, some of the spots, first off, it gives me the ability to fish them with a fly rod, because if I was in waders with back casts and everything else, I wouldn't be able to fish that spot. Whether there's rocks or a steep bank or in front of me, the bubble weed, rocks in front of me. So I get past those. I mean, it might not be a ton of distance. There's some spots where I will go out, 20 yards, maybe 30 yards. But there's a couple where it's just giving me those first 5, maybe 8 yards away from where, or beyond what I would otherwise be able to do with the waders, to now get into a point where 99% of my cast and retrieve is over productive water. And I wouldn't be able to reach those. I mean, I've got one spot, I'm thinking of the first spot that I transferred from spinning normal surf gear to the fly rod. The first fish I landed there, I don't know if a foot of fly line was hanging off of my rod tip and then the leader to where I hooked the fish. That's how close in the fish are. So I don't have to worry so much now about that casting distance because the wetsuit has afforded me a chunk of distance from shore. And I'm not swimming at this spot. I'm not swimming any of my fly spots right now. I haven't bothered with that because there's the line, there's just other issues, the stripping basket, which I hate to have to use. So even in shorter distances, just what I can gain. I mean, it does a lot to help my success rate and my abilities fly fishing with the wetsuit.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head for me with one very specific thing you said in passing, which is that you're fishing the fishable water and you're taking out all the unfishable water. That's a huge... It sounds silly to attribute it to the wetsuit, but it is. Because For me, one of my frustrations with the fly rod many times is how much time my fly is actually in the water. With the plugging rod, you pull it in, you pop it off the roller, and it's back out there in seconds. You're casting it right back out, you're back in the water. With the fly rod, many times, getting it back in, now there's a tangle, you go to cast, it goes out halfway and it catches, and then you got to bring it back in, or you find that it was fouled or something. It feels like, though that doesn't happen a lot per se, there's a lot more time where I'm messing around with something. And if I'm wasting 20, 30 feet of my stripping my fly in that's unfishable, that's even more time that I'm not having a fly in the zone. And I'm air quoting right now for people who aren't watching, in the zone, whatever that is. And that is a huge benefit of the wetsuit. The other thing you hit on, this is like one of the number one things. I'm a surf fisherman. Fly fishing is a modality. It's just a tool, a technique. It's the same as chunking or eeling or plastics or whatever. And when I'm fishing the surf, I'm fishing the surf. So if I would use a wetsuit for the plugging rod, why wouldn't I use it for the fly rod? And I'm going to spots that are fishy and have, well, it's much more challenging than the fly rod for sure. So I'll say moderately sized fish, which for me, primarily with the fly rod, it's teen fish I'm usually targeting. But I'm going to fishy places. And fishy places are the same places I'm fishing with the plugging rod and with plugs. I'm just bringing the fly rod to the places where I think I can succeed in those same places. And to succeed in those places, I have to have a wetsuit. I'm not using the excuse of the fly rod is that, oh, well, I'm fly fishing, so I get a pass to catch these smaller fish. I'm out there trying to achieve. And to achieve with the fly rod, I have to use the wetsuit. That's it. I have to. So so you're taking your fly rod. I know you have a lot less experience than I do in this realm, but you're taking your fly rod to places that you have been fishing for years with a spinning rod.
Oh, absolutely. As you know, you and I talked about the fly rod and the surf for like almost the entire time we've been friends.
Yeah, I've really had to twist your arm. Yeah. You really needed some convincing.
Yeah, because I didn't want to fall into that trap of like finding fly fishing striper spots. And it took me a while to really accept that I was going to be able to commit to taking my spots that I already have, my existing locations where I would striper fish in the surf for large striped bass, and then adapt to them with the fly rod, meaning how do I get out to where I can cast, where I can put the fly into the locations where I'm pretty sure the stripers are going to reside. That I like that spot I was describing before. The rock that I fly fish off of there, I could spin fish off of, but I actually choose a slightly different one. I don't quite take the extra couple of steps because the one that I spin fish off of actually a little more comfortable to stand on, but I get another couple of feet standing on with the wetsuit. I can get to that rock a little easier to fly fish off of. So again, it might only be like, let's just say it's 6-8 feet. That's 6-8 more feet of productive water I'm covering. And when you're describing earlier, sometimes you get the loop, sometimes you get a knot. You're describing like 99% of my casts. So it's even more important for me that I put myself in locations that I am casting over productive water, and there is no waste. Like, I'm even concerned about being more efficient with placing the fly when I'm fly fishing versus spinning, because I know to an even greater degree I have that much less limit of time where it's really going to be productive. And again, like, not to harp on it, but the wetsuit really gives me that. It's taking that little piece out, so there's another 5% of the water in front of me that's wasted, that is out, and now I don't have to worry about that. So
yeah,
it drives me nuts. I was talking to one of my buddies the other day about striper fly fishing, and he'd thrown out a couple. That sounds like a good fly fishing spot, but we don't really go there otherwise. He listed a couple of spots that we don't spin fish for stripers, but he thought could work on the fly, and I was like, why? From our conversations that if I'm going to invest the time and the energy into fly fishing the surf, I want it to be equally as productive. Now, if some of those spots could be productive, just in general, sure, I'll add them in. But I don't like to think of a spot as like a fly only. It's kind of like you said, it's a productive striper spot. What tools can I use in there? There might be better or more efficient ones for different times, but they have to be good spots for those bigger fish for me too.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is one thing we vary a little bit because I do have some fly-specific spots. The thing is, those fly-specific spots I have are some spots that I started out fishing and then realized that they weren't going to be as productive for big fish, and I moved on with a spinning rod. But now they found new life with the fly rod. So I do have a few of those spots. Something you just said also just triggered me to think, I needed to mention this. The wetsuit, whether you're a spin fisherman or a fly fisherman, but this really, I'm talking to fly fishing guys. It's not just about boulders either. It's not just about getting on the rocks. I mean, I know that's primarily what you do. That's a lot of what I do. But I also use the wetsuit on sand, but I use it in places with current where I'm out in the water. I could fish it often in waders. But for me, one of the benefits of the wetsuit is I don't have to worry about getting swamped. I don't have to worry about falling down. I don't have to worry about getting knocked down. I don't have to worry about taking one extra step and getting swept off my feet in the current. So for me, the wetsuit takes away, it's worry, it's safety, etc. But it also allows me to focus. I don't have to think about that wave that's coming. I can focus on the fishing, and if the wave hits me and knocks me off my feet, I'm now wet and I laugh. Versus if I'm in my waders, not only could I not be laughing, it could get really scary and dangerous really quickly, right? So there are places where if someone was to see me in my wetsuit would think, what in the hell is this idiot doing? Do you really need a wetsuit? But the thing is, if I want to get out to, rib depth, because that's what I need to reach distance-wise, yes, you could do that in your waders. But one wrong step, one rogue wave, and you're getting swamped. And now you don't have to think about the wetsuit. You can just let that worry go. Mm-hmm. And that is one of the top reasons also to consider if you're a fly guy, because with the fly fishing, you're already having to really focus on your casting more, your swing, your retrieve, all that stuff. I don't care what anyone says. It takes more thought. It takes more energy to do all that stuff. So the more I can focus on it without extenuating, details, taking my mind away from what I'm doing, the better. And that is such a huge thing for my wetsuit. For sure. Makes a huge difference. Huge difference. So.
No, certainly. It's, without going too much into the wetsuit, just unique side on this discussion, but that's sort of what falls back into why we're using the wetsuit and the fly.
Exactly.
Because it's what you do in these spots.
That's
spot
right.
X is a wetsuit spot for whether it's because you can get out 10 more feet, because it's a touch dangerous, whatever those things are. Sort of like it doesn't matter if you're throwing a spinning rod or a fly rod or a push button Zebco. You're using the wetsuit there.
Exactly.
It's just what you do in that spot. So that's why I choose the wetsuit when I'm fly fishing at my spots.
Exactly. I feel the same way. And I really encourage you, if you're listening to this right now and you've been interested in fly fishing, but you've been turned off because you don't want to do traditional, I'm air quoting again for people aren't watching, traditional fly things with estuaries and small flies and sand beaches. If you're a surf guy, fly fishing's been interesting, but you've been turned off because of that, put your wetsuit on, go out to your spots in the night, and have at it with the fly rod, because it can be so rewarding and there's no reason for you to not give it a try.
This has been a weekly edition of the Surfcast Podcast. You can find out more about the podcast and find more episodes at surfcastpodcast.com. And be sure to check us out on social media at the Surfcast Podcast.